Before you were ever aware of it, something in your spirit began to shift. You stopped reacting the way you used to react. Things that used to offend you suddenly lost their power. People who once stirred your emotions no longer had the keys to your peace. And you didn't even realize He was anointing you. He was separating you. He was preparing you for a level you didn't ask for but were born for. Whenever God is about to raise a person, the first thing He does is silence the unnecessary voices inside them. Not outside, inside. Because once the noise within is quiet, the world can shout and you won't break. When God anoints you dangerously, He gives you a kind of calm that scares people who thought they could control you. There comes a moment when your spirit grows stronger than your emotions. When your discernment becomes louder than your fears. When your assignment becomes more important than your attachments. And suddenly, you're not moved by what used to move you. You're not troubled by what used to intimidate you. You respond differently, not because you've become cold, but because you've become called. You begin to walk with a stillness that feels unfamiliar, even to you. That stillness is divine. It is the evidence that heaven has separated you from the world, so you can do what the world cannot understand. Emotional detachment is not weakness, it is spiritual elevation. It is the signal that your identity is no longer rooted in the shifting sands of people, but in the unshakable foundation of purpose. There is a kind of anointing that makes you uninterested in arguments. You lose the appetite for unnecessary conversations. You no longer seek validation from places that once fed your insecurity. That is the anointing maturing you. It's not arrogance, it's clarity. It's not pride, it's purity. God removes your emotional dependence on people because He is about to trust you with something bigger than people's opinions. He disconnects you from the applause so you won't die from the criticism. He teaches you to walk alone so that no crowd can ever confuse your identity again. And the more detached you become, the more spiritually dangerous you are to the enemy, because you can no longer be manipulated by emotion. The real sign that you are anointed is when betrayal doesn't break you, rejection doesn't define you, and loss doesn't destroy you. Not because you're numb, but because you're anchored. When someone who once meant everything walks away and you still stand, that's the anointing. When people attack you and you remain focused, that's the anointing. When life hits you hard and you refuse to collapse, that's the anointing. You begin to see that your stability is not tied to seasons and your peace is not tied to relationships. You carry a God-given detachment that keeps you centered. You don't chase what leaves, you don't fight what God removes, and you don't fear what tries to rise against you. Because you are not led by emotions, you are led by assignment. You know you're dangerously anointed when silence becomes your strategy, when prayer becomes your response, when discernment becomes your protection. When you are no longer pulled by the temporary because you're anchored in the eternal. You start walking with a confidence that doesn't come from personality, it comes from identity. You begin to realize that your emotional detachment is not a sign of losing yourself. It's a sign of finding God's version of you. And when you reach that place, no weapon formed against you needs to fail, because it can't even find a place to enter. Your emotions are no longer open doors. Your spirit has taken over. And that is the evidence that God has anointed you for something greater than what you've seen. When God anoints you, He begins by removing your emotional dependence on the very things that once shaped your identity. You don't always notice it at first. It starts quietly, internally, as though something sacred is being rearranged inside you. The places where you once felt fear, insecurity, and anxiety begin to weaken. The emotions that used to control your reactions start losing their grip. You suddenly find yourself standing in situations that used to shake you, yet you remain unmoved, not because the situation changed, but because you did. That shift is not accidental. It is the beginning of divine detachment. It is heaven breaking the chains of emotional bondage so that your spirit can rise to the place your purpose requires. God cannot elevate a person whose identity is tied to unstable emotions. He must first create distance between you and the emotional triggers that once dictated your decisions. This detachment is surgical, intentional, and deeply spiritual. You notice that people who once offended you no longer have the same access to your peace. Words that once wounded you now pass through you without injury. You begin to experience moments where you pause, breathe, and respond from a higher awareness instead of reacting from old wounds. That is what happens when God begins His work in you. Emotional detachment is not the loss of feeling, it is the purification of feeling. It is God taking authority over the emotional world inside you, so that your identity becomes rooted in Him rather than people, circumstances, or past trauma. The anointing cannot flourish in a soul that is easily influenced, easily shaken, or easily manipulated. So God pulls you inward, strengthens your internal world, and disconnects you from emotional patterns that once held you hostage. The more God prepares you, the less connected you become to environments that once controlled you. You wake up one day and realize you're no longer aligned with certain conversations, certain habits, and certain circles. The things that once entertained you now feel empty. The people who used to excite you now feel draining. It's not that you're better than anyone, it's that you are being separated for something greater. Anointed people often experience a holy restlessness before they recognize their calling. It's the discomfort of outgrowing what you have not yet stepped out of. It's the spiritual tension of becoming something new while still standing in old spaces. And the only way God transitions you is by detaching your emotions from the old, so that your spirit can receive the new. There is a divine reason God disconnects your emotions before He elevates your position. Emotionally attached people cannot discern the difference between opportunity and distraction. They confuse loyalty with limitation. They stay in relationships that drain their purpose because their emotions are louder than their assignment. But when God anoints you, He flips the order inside of you. Your spirit becomes leader, your purpose becomes the compass, and your emotions become servants instead of masters. You begin to see with clarity what you once justified with emotion. You begin to recognize misalignment that you once called loyalty. You begin to sense when a door is closing, not because you were rejected, but because God is redirecting you. The enemy's greatest weapon against an anointed person is not failure, sin, or opposition, it's emotional manipulation. If your emotions can be controlled, your destiny can be delayed. But when God anoints you, He removes the emotional strings that people once pulled. You stop being motivated by the fear of losing someone. You stop being controlled by the fear of being misunderstood. You stop carrying the weight of trying to please everyone. Emotional detachment becomes the shield that protects your purpose. It is the inner strength that keeps you focused when life tries to pull you into chaos. It is the divine clarity that keeps you steady when your heart is tempted to wander. Anointed detachment means you can love without losing yourself. It means you can care without being controlled. It means you can walk away from what no longer aligns with your assignment without guilt, fear, or regret. When God anoints you, He teaches you that emotional attachment is not the same as spiritual connection. Emotional attachment is based on need. Spiritual connection is based on purpose. Emotional attachment keeps you tied to the past. Spiritual connection propels you into destiny. Emotional attachment weakens you. Spiritual connection strengthens you. So God, in His wisdom, breaks the attachment so you can build the connections. This detachment often feels lonely at first, because God separates you inwardly before He elevates you outwardly. You start noticing yourself withdrawing from noise, chaos, and unnecessary conversations. You start losing interest in superficial relationships and shallow interactions. You begin craving silence, clarity, and meaning. This is not isolation, it is consecration. It is not a breakdown, it is preparation. God pulls you away emotionally so He can pull you deeper spiritually. He removes the emotional clutter so you can hear His voice without interference. He removes emotional dependencies so you can rely on Him without confusion. And the more He detaches you, the more His voice becomes your anchor. As God detaches you emotionally, He also strengthens you spiritually. You gain a sense of identity that no longer needs approval. You gain a peace that no longer depends on circumstances. You gain a confidence that no longer comes from people. Emotional detachment is the foundation of spiritual authority. It's the sign that God is trusting you with something weighty, something that requires stability, maturity, and inner strength. The kinds of assignments God gives to anointed people cannot be carried by fragile emotions. They must be carried by conviction, clarity, and purpose. When God disconnects your emotions from what once controlled, He is not making you cold, He's making you called. He's not hardening your heart. He's protecting your purpose. He's not taking away your sensitivity. He's refining it so it serves Him, not your fears. Emotional detachment is heaven's way of preparing you to be unstoppable. When the chains of emotional dependency fall off, the enemy loses the ability to predict you, provoke you, or derail you. You become spiritually dangerous because your stability no longer comes from the world. It comes from God.